fees and its abolishment last week. The Minister of Higher Education, Training and Innovation, together with NUST management, held a consultative meeting and agreed to allow students to register for free temporarily. Vice Chancellor of NUST, Professor Chama Chivikwa, now joins me in the studio to shed more light on this matter. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, Mr. Sam.
Obviously, since last week, the newspapers have been flooded with the NUST and what's been taking place there. Could you update the nation of what transpired at the institution last week?
What transpired was an action by students with the support of, I should say the SRC, with the support of NANSO and so on, to disrupt the administration of the institution based on their demands constructed or agreed by themselves that previous evening. So in fact, it was not a legal process that they followed. It was basically an illegal process. They could have followed procedures to at least inform the police in time and so on, and that did not happen. But in any case, be that as it may, we did manage to deal with the issue during that day and resume the administration and registration and all that the following day.
Well, obviously, we know that you're in the meetings with the higher tertiary minister. So, what are some of the resolutions that came out of these consultations? Because there seems to be a lot of mixed messaging. Registration fees have fallen, but only temporarily, only for students who have passed. So what are the final resolutions that have come out as a result of this action?
Yeah, the fees have not changed. The fees have not fallen. What was agreed was to allow the students who cannot afford to register, paying their registration and tuition deposits to register, which means that the debit or the debt will go onto their accounts, and they have to settle the debt throughout the semester. They're given that opportunity up until they write the exams.
Okay, so in that instance that the fees have not fallen, but you're just giving them almost like a postponement in terms of the registration, what position does that make the strike? Would this not lead to greater instability at the institution? Or what is the position of the institution? Obviously, we know that you're standing to lose about $90 million as well. So how are you going to make this right?
Yeah, the other point that was agreed was to allow the students with standing debt to register. And the ministry has promised to address that issue. Obviously, we cannot just take in students without charging fees because that's a substantial amount of our income, as 30 to 40% of our income. So you got to balance the book somehow. And if you don't take that income now and the students don't pay until June, you have no income for the first few months from the students, and your first subsidy from government comes only in June or so.
Okay.
So for the first 6 months you have no income whatsoever. How can you run an institution?
Is part of the challenge the fact that we have not, for instance, pre-planned around Namibia being a country with a high disparity between rich and poor, and there's this idea that education is the great equalizer. This intersection between, say, having to achieve education to kind of reach development goals in the country, on the one hand, combined with a population that maybe does not have the money. How do you respond to that criticism that says that education now is only for the elites when you live in a country with such inequality?
Well, I wouldn't agree that necessarily that education is for the elite. If you're poor and you take a loan, it does make you an elite, for instance. So it's not only for the elite. Obviously, there are issues to address in terms of income disparities in a society, but we cannot just demand everything for free. Mind you, when we get things for free, we don't tend to value them, appreciate them more than our own. I'll give you an example. When we use public spaces, we just don't seem to care for that space more than we care for our own houses. So when you give something for free, there is no responsibility at the end.
But the question is, I think, more about affordability in terms of access. Even if you make the argument that you're not having it for free, are your university's fees increasing at an exorbitant rate? And for instance, there was an issue on registration fees that have increased again when your management made concessions not to increase that registration fee. So in terms of that, maybe not having it for free, but is the escalating rates disproportionate to where they should be, is the question. And does that lead to maybe things like mismanagement at a council level? Not saying that we have leadership that is able to adequately plan finances and prepare that, and then places the burden on the students at the end of the day. Is there something like that? Could this not be just a question of mismanagement?
No, there is no question of mismanagement. Our fees, our registration fees, at registration, when you pay the registration fee and the tuition deposit, has remained same for 3 years, for instance. Our overall fees increment is roughly at inflation. So we are not exorbitant. When you say exorbitant, you must make a comparison with the likes. And then you can say you are arriving at a point of unfair advantage for the institution because you're charging so much more money and you are out of the league. I'll give you an example. UCT will charge you, before you register, you must pay about 27,000 rand before you register. That's just the deposit. We are charging 3,500. What is exorbitant about our fees? So there's nothing extraordinary about our engagement with the students. The fees that we charge are not unreasonable because we make comparisons with all the other institutions.
But let's make a comparison with the University of Namibia, for instance, that charges 1,500 for registration fees, and then the Polytech students feel like they have to pay a greater burden. And remember, your fees are per semester, and so there is, in terms of comparison, other universities in the country that provide, greater access in terms of registration. So what do you say to that?
No, there is a misconception that's being propagated.
Okay.
We charge 1,500 for registration, and so does UNAM. We charge 2,200 for tuition deposit. UNAM charges 2,250 or so for the same. So there's nothing exorbitant about us. We're not charging anything extraordinary. Mind you, the 2,200 that the students are paying, and they take on average 6 courses per semester. It's the fees of basically 1 course. So out of the 6 courses, at registration, pay the fees of 1 course, and then you can pay off over the next 5 or 6 months before you write the examinations. So there's nothing unreasonable about that. Affordability is another issue, obviously. But when you get something that is not free by right, because it's not in your constitution as free education in higher education, you must pay for it. Somebody must pay for it. The student must pay for it, or the parent, or somebody else must pay for it. In the end, if it's free education, then the taxpayer or anybody else will carry that burden.
Okay.
So we got to understand it from that angle, that somebody has to carry a responsibility. Somebody makes the argument, yeah, how can a parent of 5 children afford to send kids to a university? Now, when we make children, we also should plan for them. We should go out and look for sponsorships and so on. You cannot just produce
but I think
and give the responsibility away. It cannot be.
And I don't think people necessarily want to deviate from that responsibility. I think instances they do. But the question is the university giving the most affordable package in what they can do when you're looking at, for instance, remuneration packages of some of the staff? Does that become, in terms of the financing formulas that the university uses, does that become, a primary focus to remunerate people at the expense of the students? The question is, who must carry the burden?
Has somebody made a comparison of what we pay and what other universities in the region pay? We pay a reasonable fee or salary that other institutions will pay, roughly. We're not at the top. We're probably at the bottom. So we are not putting the burden on a student, and it should not be seen as you putting the burden on the student. The student has come to get a service that is payable. You understand? And we are not out of the league. But you got to pay a reasonable amount to attract a professor. For instance, a professor will cost you roughly say $1 million. If you attract a professor from another country, it will cost you $1 million Namibian dollars. That's not unreasonable. Because if you don't bring that person in, you don't transfer the knowledge, you don't build your economy.
Okay.
So when people look at salaries, they say they only look at them in vacuum. We sit there and we say, the figure is high, but you don't make a comparison with anything else.
So in terms of this issue, do you think it's a NSFAF issue more than it's a NUST issue? What is the role of NSFAF in all of this?
NSFAF provides bursaries to needy students, and they play a different role. You've got to understand that there are different streams of income, and NSFAF fulfills to some extent that one. The third stream income, where the students and other fees are coming into the institution. So those who are sponsored by NSFAF would pay through NSFAF. So NSFAF is not giving you subsidy, but it's only funding the students who are studying there with an obligation, obviously, because they have signed an agreement to pay back the money some other time.
Okay. So, Mr. Chivika, what's the way forward for the institution? You said, the actions that were taken by the SRC were illegal. Reports say the SRC has been trying to engage council through, the President Council does not take student issues seriously. Therefore, they had to resort to illegal actions. What is the way forward for your institution to ensure that at the end of the day, everybody wins, the students and the institution?
Yeah. It's important that when the students formulate their requests and demands or whatever that you may call it, they make them at the right time to the right people. When you ask SRC president, place your requests in writing, let's have a discussion. When you ask them, and when they don't do that, when they resort to other means, then that becomes a problem. We always teach them through student leadership and so on that you must first engage and then disengage. You cannot just do things without engaging. There is no unwillingness on our part to engage the students. There's no unwillingness on our part to listen, because at the end, it was agreed with the ministry. And we could only do that because the ministry would provide the means for us to be able to do that, because we can't do it without the support of the ministry. So we couldn't just sit there and say, yeah, okay, no fees, your debts are forgiven.
But even from your side, do you put that burden on yourself to engage students in terms of fee structures when things like fees must fall in South Africa have happened? I mean, that sets a precedent even for our students to say, if in the instance where we can't afford it, this becomes an option. So does management also make adequate efforts to engage students in ensuring that consultation is part of policy making at the institution?
On an annual basis, we engage the SRC in the review of the fees. The fees of this year were agreed with the SRC. For instance, the fees of last year were agreed the previous year. And those fees are tabled at council, where SRC sits. And those fees are approved, because we have made comparisons, and we are not unreasonable. So we engage the students that way. If you think your fees are high, give us an example that we are out of the league. You understand what I'm saying? Because it comes at an expense. You must maintain the institution, you must maintain the infrastructure, you must buy new computers and things like that. And you can't do it because the formula or the subsidy that you get doesn't provide for that. So there must be another way of income, and that's where you charge the students. Now, affordability, that's something else. Then there has to be a national engagement, how we are catering for those who are needy and can't afford.
So that's my final question in terms of, people want quality education, obviously at a tertiary level. Isn't it a shared responsibility, and within that, who is then going to primarily drive this in ensuring, access affordability in the interest of the institution? What is your message to not just NUST students, but to the nature, of Namibians sitting out there and thinking that it is an unequal matter, it is something that marginalizes people? What's your message to addressing all of this criticism and then paving the way forward for NUST?
There are many role players, including the ordinary citizen, obviously, because when you pay tax, then tax goes into government coffers, the tax gets distributed to, other, activities, some activities that you know of, some you don't know of, and so on, but that's for the nation. So there are there are many direct players, for instance, the students, the management of the institution, the ministry, NBC, the cabinet, and so on. And then the Council for Higher Education, and then the NUST, the Fund for Bursaries, and so on. So there are many players in this game, and we must engage them at the right level. We cannot engage without the others being engaged, but there must be a facilitator, and that facilitator should be the ministry, say, or the Council for Higher Education, to bring the players together to take this issue forward. But it cannot be that now it must be all free, and it must be all now, it must be like this, like the way I want it. We got to agree on the way forward. So, but it cannot be just anarchy. You come and demand, and and if you don't agree, then you must just go on strike.
So the final thing is registration is temporarily held up. Supplementary exams.
Mind you, by Thursday, we started registration on Monday. By Thursday, 5,000 students had registered already, which means that they have settled their debts, and they have actually paid their deposit, their registration, and so on. So already 5,000 students had registered by then. So it's not everybody who's not able to afford, and that's not excluding those who are on the student fund. You understand? That's about, say, 4,000 or so new students who are coming in, who will be on the student assistance fund. So there are those who can afford and those who cannot afford. So, but the debate should not be about the totality of the game, not about just 1/4 of the field, and then the center field and all that. Registration resumed on Friday. Supplementary examinations are continuing today, and everything's on track.
Everything's on track. Professor, thank you for making time out to come join us and clarify the issue to the nation.
Thank you.